Chapter 1. A Letter from Fairwind. The morning light filtered through the lace curtains of the drawing room at Hillside Cottage, bathing the room in a soft golden glow. Outside, the village of St. Mary Mead stirred to life in its usual, unhurried rhythm. Milk carts creaked along the lane, sparrows chirped in the hedgerows, and the baker's boy whistled a cheery tune as he made his rounds. Inside, however, the atmosphere was one of quiet industry and contentment. Miss Marple sat in her favorite high-backed armchair, a bowl of pale blue yarn resting in a basket beside her, knitting needles clicking gently in her hands. She was working on a cable-knit cardigan for her great-niece, and, as ever, her thoughts wandered idly between dropped stitches and the vagaries of human nature. The fire in the hearth gave off a gentle crackle, its warmth warding off the last vestiges of the morning chill. On a nearby side table, a cup of tea sat untouched, now lukewarm, much like Miss Marple's own opinion of modern blends. The stillness of the moment was broken by the soft creak of the front gate. Miss Marple's eyes lifted, alert, yet composed. In St. Mary Mead, even the sound of a gate held meaning. Footsteps approached, unhurried, familiar. A moment later, Gladys, the maid, entered the drawing room with an envelope in hand. "This just came by express post, Mum, from the Fairwind Hotel," she said, placing the envelope gently beside the teacup. Behind her, the silhouette of the postman could be seen through the frosted glass of the entryway. Miss Marple smiled knowingly. "Is that Tom Gregory out there?" she asked, with a warmth reserved for old acquaintances. Gladys nodded and stepped aside. "Shall I ask him in?" "No need, dear," said Miss Marple, rising with a grace that belied her years. She opened the door just enough to peer out. "Tom." The postman turned, his cap in hand. "Morning, Miss Marple." "And how are you these days?" she asked kindly. "Still keeping Mary on her feet, I hope." Tom chuckled, his weather-worn face lighting up. "Thanks to you, Mom. That herbal tonic you told me about works wonders, it does. She's been sleeping through the night for a change." "I'm very glad to hear it," Miss Marple replied. "And do remember to give her my regards." "I will, Ma'am. Well, I'd best be off, but I'll come round one day soon for a proper chat, if that's all right." "You know you're always welcome." With that, Tom tipped his cap and made his way back down the lane. Miss Marple watched him for a moment before returning indoors, her attention now focused on the envelope resting on her tea table. The handwriting was instantly recognizable, looping and erratic, the unmistakable scroll of Freddie Large. Her brow furrowed slightly. She opened the envelope with a silver paper knife and unfolded the letter. "Hi, it's Freddie. You must remember me, the one who used to annoy you endlessly in class. Two girls, Elena Dorn and Beatrix Harrow, went for a picnic in the jungle from our hotel, but only the two boys returned. The police are baffled. If you don't come, my hotel's reputation will be ruined. Please come. You're the only one who can see the truth." Miss Marple read the letter twice, then a third time. Her expression grew thoughtful, the knitting lying forgotten in her lap. "Freddie Large," she murmured, a faint line of worry appearing between her brows. "The boy who couldn't sit still in Latin class. And now the owner of a coastal hotel. I suppose anything is possible with time." She stood and moved to the window, gazing out over the quiet garden with its rows of tidy rose bushes and sleeping lavender. Her thoughts, however, were far from roses. Two girls missing, two boys returned, a police force confounded, and yet not a single mention of foul play. "Curious, this new mention of murder," she said aloud, "but something is certainly being hidden." She turned decisively. "Gladys, would you be a dear and bring down the travel case? The small one will do. I believe I shall be taking a short journey." Gladys blinked, surprised. "Oh, yes, ma'am, right away." Miss Marple sat once more, folding the letter with neat precision and placing it back in its envelope. Her knitting was set carefully aside as though it would still be there when she returned. And it would. But the look in her eyes was no longer one of gentle reflection. It was the sharp, discerning look of a woman who had learned, over many years and many tragedies, that evil often lurked where one least expected it. There was a rustle upstairs as Gladys pulled down the suitcase. Meanwhile, Miss Marple stood before her modest bookshelf, scanning the titles until she located a slim volume on coastal flora. One never knew when such knowledge might prove useful. By the time her small bag was packed with her essentials, a warm shawl, a bottle of lavender water, her favorite spectacles, and a notebook bound in green leather, the fire had dwindled to embers, and the tea had gone cold entirely. She glanced once more at the letter. Freddie Larch had never been one to panic. Not even during that dreadful exam he hadn't prepared for. If he had written to her now, after so many years, it meant he truly believed something was amiss. Miss Marple placed the letter into her handbag and picked up her gloves. "Very well," she said to herself. "Let's see what trouble you found yourself in, Freddie." A few hours later, a small taxi pulled away from Hillside Cottage. Through the rear window, the village of St. Mary Mead grew smaller and smaller, its peace untouched by the brewing storm far away. Miss Marple sat upright in the back seat, watching the road ahead. Her eyes, still sharp as a hawk's, missed nothing. Somewhere at the edge of the sea at a hotel called Fairwind, a mystery waited to be unraveled. And Miss Marple never could resist a mystery. Chapter 2. Whispers by the Sea. The coastal train wound its way along the jagged shoreline, the scent of salt water riding in through the open windows. Gulls screeched overhead, and in the distance, the waves rolled and shimmered like strips of torn silk under the morning sun. Inside the train, Miss Marple sat upright, hands gently folded in her lap, her hat perfectly pinned, and her handbag resting against her knees. She watched the changing landscape with keen interest, fields giving way to scrubland, then rocky outcrops and glimpses of the sea below. It had been years since she last visited this particular corner of the country. Yet something about it felt both familiar and unsettling, as though the air carried old secrets. She thought of Freddie Larch, nervous, rambling Freddie from her school days, and of the strange, urgent letter he had sent. 2 girls had gone into the jungle. Only one had returned, and even she, it seemed, had brought the jungle back with her, in her silence. 2 hours later, the train slowed as it pulled into the modest station that served the village of Bramblegate. A sleepy platform greeted her, stone benches, painted iron lampposts, and a lone porter wheeling a cart of luggage toward a horse-drawn trap. Miss Marple disembarked, with a steady grace, the crisp breeze tugging at the edge of her coat. A man in a brown suit approached her with a cap in his hands. "Miss Marple, I've been sent by Mr. Larch. Name's Horace. The car's just this way." She thanked him politely and followed him to a dusty Morris parked just outside the station gates. As they drove, she took in the village, rows of stone cottages with flower boxes, a chapel on the hill, and winding lanes that disappeared into groves of pine. It was a postcard sort of place, charming and picturesque, but there was a tension in the air, a hush too deliberate, like a conversation paused mid-sentence. At the village's edge, the Fairwind Hotel came into view. It sat perched dramatically on a cliff, overlooking the restless sea. A grand old Victorian structure, its facade was painted cream, though the years had dulled the color to a weary beige. White painted balconies clung to its sides, facing the sea winds like open arms longing for something lost. Miss Marple noted the ivy climbing its walls, the rust on the iron gates, and the silence that surrounded the place. Not even the gulls cried here. Inside, the wooden floorboards of the hotel gave a low creak with each step, as though groaning under the weight of memory. A thin brass bell sat on the front desk, and when pressed, it summoned a slim young woman in a gray dress with dark circles under her eyes. "You must be Miss Marple," she said with a weary smile. "Welcome to Fairwind. Mr. Larch is expecting you." She led Miss Marple through a dim hallway into the drawing room, where the sea light pooled against stained glass windows. The room was lined with antique furniture, wingback chairs, tufted sofas, a sideboard with an ornate silver tea set. Foggy oil paintings of unknown ancestors hung in mismatched frames. In the corner stood an upright piano, its keys yellowed with age. No one remembered the last time it had played. And there, seated on a floral sofa beside the bay window, was Freddie Larch. He rose as soon as he saw her, his face alight with a mixture of hope and worry. His suit was rumpled, and his collar slightly askew. The Freddie of old had always been a little scattered, but never this anxious. "Miss Marple, thank God you're here," he said, hurrying over. "I was beginning to lose hope." She smiled warmly and took his hand. Now, Freddie, you always did overthink things. Why don't you begin at the beginning?" He gestured for her to sit, then perched on the edge of the sofa like a man about to deliver troubling news. "We found Elena," he began, lowering his voice. "But she's changed. She's in a state of shock, barely speaks, and when she does, it's nonsense. Just a few strange words she keeps repeating. Mango tree, statue, Jamon. That's all." Miss Marple's expression remained calm, but her eyes sharpened. "And Beatrix? She's still missing," Freddie said grimly. "It's been 3 days." He went on to explain. 2 boys, Jasper and Callum, had joined Elena and Beatrix for a picnic. All 4 had ventured into the jungle path that started behind the hotel. At some point, the girls had wandered ahead. When the boys turned a corner near the stone outcrop, the girls were gone. "The police thought the boys might have done something," Freddie admitted. "But there's nothing to link them. No blood, no signs of a struggle. Just absence." Miss Marple was silent for a moment, tapping her gloved fingers gently against the armrest. "This," she said at last, "is no ordinary case. I'd like to speak with Elena. I must visit the jungle myself." Freddie nodded slowly, then winced, rubbed his temple. "Of course, but before anything else, please sit, have some tea. I've been so rattled I forgot my manners." Tea was brought in on a silver tray, along with warm scones and a dish of plum jam. Miss Marple poured herself a cup, stirred in a touch of milk, and took a quiet sip. Patience between them was filled only by the faint ticking of the grandfather clock and the distant rhythm of waves crashing against the rocks below. She set her cup down and said once more, "There's something hidden here, Freddie. Something neither the boys nor the police have seen. And Elena, she holds a part of the truth, even if she doesn't know it." Freddie's hands trembled slightly as he held his teacup. "I should tell you the jungle beyond the garden. It's quite deserted. Old, gnarled, overgrown. Locals say it used to be part of some estate that burned down a century ago. No one goes in for pleasure anymore." Miss Marple raised a brow. "Then that is precisely where I must go." Her voice was calm, resolute. She had encountered fear before. She had seen madness and malevolence wear polite faces. She had stood where others faltered. This, she knew in her bones, was not just a missing person. This was something darker. Freddie attempted a smile. "You've not changed, Jane, not one bit." She allowed herself a faint smile in return, then stood. "I must rest, Freddie. The journey has taken more out of me than I care to admit. Please have dinner sent up. I'll need my strength tomorrow." "Of course. You'll be in room 64. It's upstairs at the end of the west wing, quiet and with a sea view." Miss Marple was shown to her room, a cozy, modestly decorated chamber with a writing desk, a fireplace, and a narrow balcony facing the sea. She took a moment to breathe in the salty air before removing her gloves and opening her notebook. A new case had begun, and every observation would matter. Dinner arrived: vegetable broth, buttered toast, and a pot of hot tea. She ate slowly, reflecting on every word Freddie had spoken. Mango tree, statue, Yamun. Odd fragments, like pieces of a shattered mirror. When she finally settled into bed, the sound of the sea lulled her into a light, dreamless sleep. But even in slumber, her mind remained alert, turning over clues, scanning shadows, listening for the faintest whisper of truth. Tomorrow, she would enter the jungle. And perhaps there, in the hush between branches, the mystery would begin to speak. Chapter 3. Beneath the Moss and Silence. The rain from the previous night had given way to a pale, overcast morning. Seagulls called faintly from the cliffside, their cries echoing over the sea. Inside the reception hall of the Fairwind Hotel, a thin thread of tension wove through the otherwise quiet space. The wooden floor, still slick in places from sea mist and damp shoes, creaked under the weight of Inspector Sims's pacing boots. He stood near the carved banister, arms folded, glancing occasionally toward the staircase. Beside him, Mr. Freddie Larch adjusted his waistcoat nervously, his eyes darting between the ornate clock on the wall and the entrance to the dining room. At precisely 9 o'clock, Miss Jane Marple descended the staircase with graceful poise, clad in a dove-gray coat and holding a pair of clean gloves in her left hand. Her expression was pleasant, but there was an unmistakable sharpness in her eyes. Freddie stepped forward quickly. "Inspector Sims," he said, clearing his throat, "allow me to introduce Miss Marple of St. Mary Mead. Her eyes have seen things," he added, with a half-chuckle, "that even Scotland Yard can't quite explain away." Inspector Sims, a man in his early 50s with a sturdy frame and a habit of squinting thoughtfully, extended his hand. "It's a pleasure, Miss Marple," he said, with a courteous nod. "I've heard of your reputation." Miss Marple gave a modest smile. "Oh, I do hope only the useful parts." Without further delay, they set out for the jungle path that wound its way behind the hotel gardens. A young constable named Edgar joined them, walking ahead with a careful gait. The jungle, or what remained of an old forest estate, was denser than Miss Marple had anticipated. Trees hunched close together, their branches tangled like uncombed hair. The ground was muddy and slick, the air thick with the scent of wet leaves and something faintly metallic beneath it. "Watch your step," Sims warned as Miss Marple carefully navigated a slope bordered by moss-covered stones. The girl, Eleanor, was found just past this bend, lying unconscious. He stopped at a patch of flattened undergrowth. There was nothing visibly amiss at first, just soggy leaves and churned soil. "This is where we found her," Sims said, face down, no blood, no torn clothing, just silence. Miss Marple bent forward, her fingers brushing the edge of a low shrub. "The rain has done its work," she murmured, "but sometimes the earth remembers longer than we expect." Then, just past a thorny bush, something caught the light. A flicker of crimson, half concealed beneath fallen leaves. "Wait," she said quietly. Constable Edgar knelt beside it, pulling on his gloves before carefully retrieving the item. It was a scarf, silk, torn at one end and unmistakably stained with dried blood. Inspector Sims let out a low whistle. No one mentioned this before. Miss Marple took the scarf in her hands, turning it delicately. "This wasn't dropped in fear," she said. "This was left deliberately. A marker, perhaps. Or a warning." A few yards further, Edgar paused again. "Ma'am, there's something else." Half buried in the mud was the broken heel of a sandal, sleek, black, patent leather, with a faint gold monogram. Miss Marple examined it with interest. "Designer," she remarked, "and expensive, the sort of thing you wouldn't wear for a picnic in a jungle unless you didn't plan to walk far." Inspector Sims crouched beside her. "There's more." He pointed to a square object sticking out from the mud near a tree root. It was a matchbox, damp but still legible, the Harrow Club, private members only. Sims narrowed his eyes. Harrow. That name rings a bell. Miss Marple's gaze remained on the box. Her voice, when it came, was soft and distant. "Yes, and I remember precisely where that name holds weight." Sims looked up. "Where?" But she only shook her head. "We'll come to that." The group stood in silence for a moment, the breeze rattling the treetops above. Miss Marple turned slowly, scanning the area with an almost meditative stillness. She knelt and pressed 2 fingers gently to the damp soil. "The earth here was disturbed recently," she said. "More than once." There's been hiding, and there's been dragging. The jungle held its breath. By the time they turned back, dusk was descending. A veil of fog was creeping in from the sea, coiling around the tree trunks. On the way back to the hotel, Miss Marple made a quiet request. "I'd like to visit Elena if possible." Freddie arranged it at once. The girl's room was small, pale blue in color, and dimly lit. Elena sat on the edge of her bed, her posture unnaturally rigid. She did not look up as they entered. Her eyes stared forward, vacant, yet wide, as though watching something only she could see. Miss Marple didn't speak at first. She merely sat beside her and offered a warm hand on Eleanor's. There was a faint tremble beneath the girl's skin. Gently, Miss Marple looked down. Around each wrist, faint but clear, were rope marks, red and raw, like reminders of captivity. Elena's fingernails were chipped, her lips dry. "She's not speaking," Freddie whispered. "She keeps repeating strange things. Mango tree, statue, Jamun, that's all." Miss Marple leaned in and said softly, "You've come back from somewhere very dark, my dear, and you left someone behind." Elena didn't respond, but her fingers twitched slightly in Miss Marple's hand. Back in her room, Miss Marple opened her green leather-bound diary and began to write with her favorite black ink. Blood on scarf, heel in soil, matchbox from a private club, rope on wrist, silence in the eyes. A moment later, there was a knock at the door. Inspector Sims entered, hat in hand. "What's your impression?" he asked. Miss Marple closed her diary and looked up at him with the calm certainty of someone who had seen the worst in people and survived it. "This was no robbery," she said. Sims looked puzzled. "Then what was it?" Miss Marple stood and walked to the window. The sun was slipping into the horizon, casting a rust-colored glow over the restless sea. "It was an attempt to bury the truth," she said simply. "Someone did not want Beatrix to speak. Someone wanted Elena to forget. And someone left behind just enough to confuse the rest of us." Sims frowned, then nodded slowly. "You're saying this was planned?" "Meticulously," Miss Marple replied. "But plans, like footprints, leave their impressions, even in rain." She turned back toward him. "It's getting dark. We should return. Tomorrow we must go further, beyond the bushes, beyond the silence." And so they did. That evening, dinner was served in hushed tones. The guests, few in number, kept to themselves. The clink of cutlery echoed in the vast dining hall. Freddie seemed paler than usual. The receptionist avoided eye contact. When Miss Marple retired to her room, she left her diary open on the desk. The sea sang its endless lullaby beyond the cliff, and somewhere beneath that melody, the truth waited to be found. Chapter 4. Beneath the still earth. The morning broke gray and damp, as if the sky itself bore the weight of what had yet to be uncovered. The sea moaned far below the cliff, and mist threaded its way through the hotel gardens. Inside the Fairwind Hotel, breakfast was served in silence, broken only by the clinking of cutlery and the occasional murmur. Most guests had already heard about the discovery in the jungle the day before, though few dared speak it aloud. Miss Marple sat at a corner table with her tea untouched, her eyes focused on the garden path beyond the window. She wore a charcoal gray coat today, buttoned to the neck, and her handbag sat by her side like a trusted companion. Across the room, Inspector Sims stood speaking to the constable, his voice low but tense. At precisely 8:30, Miss Marple rose. Without a word, she joined the two men near the lobby, where Freddie Larch hovered anxiously, wringing his hands. "She's ready," Sims said to the constable, who nodded and moved ahead to prepare the car. The jungle was no less haunting by daylight. As they entered the path again, the air grew unnaturally still. Though it was morning, the forest seemed suspended in twilight. The sun filtered to a dim haze through thick, damp leaves. A clinging moisture lay on everything, leaves, bark, the very soil, and the silence was dense, as though the trees themselves were holding breath. When they reached the clearing where Elena had first been discovered, Miss Marple paused, but instead of stopping, she looked beyond the path. "We need to go further," she said softly. "What we found before was only the beginning." Sims gave a nod, and the constable led the way, pushing aside branches and overgrowth. The earth here was more uneven, roots jutted up like veins, and the underbrush was dense. And then the smell hit them. It was sharp, sweet, and sickening, a smell that hollowed the lungs and turned the stomach. A few feet ahead, just behind a tangle of thorny shrubs, something unnatural broke the rhythm of green. "Hold up," the constable said, drawing his breath. They approached slowly. He pulled aside the branches, revealing a patch of earth and leaves, stained in dark rust. There, half concealed beneath a torn strip of fabric, was what no one wanted to name. A sliver of skin, a hand, a curled piece of something that might once have been hair. Sims cursed under his breath. "Step back," he said sharply. The constable knelt carefully and began to remove the layers, cloth, dirt, leaves, one by one. The horror emerged gradually, severed limbs, flesh wrapped in bloodied garments, bones splintered and buried. It was not just a body, it was a message, a statement of silencing, of destruction. It was Beatrix. Inspector Sims, pale but composed, called in an urgent order through his wireless set to seal the area. "We'll need forensics from the city," he said. "No one touches anything else." Miss Marple stood a little apart from them. Her eyes were steady, but there was sorrow in the curve of her mouth. "This wasn't done in rage," she said after a moment. "This wasn't chaos. This was preparation, cold, precise, and fearful." Sims glanced over. "Fearful?" "Yes," she replied. "Someone feared what Beatrix knew, or what she might have said." She stepped closer to a patch of churned earth and knelt without hesitation. With a gloved hand, she gently brushed aside a layer of moss. Something metallic glinted. She lifted it. A small golden button, circular and finely engraved with a lion crest. She turned it between her fingers. "This crest is familiar," she said quietly. From her handbag she withdrew her green leather diary and wrote in small, tidy script, "Golden button with lion crest, possibly from uniform, club insignia, or covert identifier. Body in pieces, calculated disposal." She stood slowly and looked to one side where something dark was pressed into the earth. It was a cigar, partially smoked, its ash end still intact despite the rain. Miss Marple added one more line. "Discarded cigar. Possible presence of observer or second party." The ride back to the hotel was silent. When the body was discreetly brought in by authorities and moved through the service entrance, a ripple of grief swept through the Fairwind Hotel. Beatrix's parents had arrived the day before, and the news shattered them. Her mother collapsed in the reception lounge, sobbing uncontrollably, while her father stood stiff as stone, unable or unwilling to speak. The staff whispered in corridors. Guests lingered awkwardly near windows, eyes darting and voices lowered. Miss Marple, returning through the main corridor, was just about to turn the corner toward the parlor when she paused. Near the side passage leading to the staff quarters, she caught sight of Mr. Harrow. His usually composed posture was rigid with fury. He stood locked in confrontation with a man dressed in a dark navy coat. "You again?" Harrow spat. "I told you to leave me alone." The man said nothing. He gave Harrow a long, level look, and then walked out of the hotel without another word. But Miss Marple had seen enough. She noted the man's coat, navy wool, faintly worn at the shoulders, and the way he walked, hurried, but not careless, confident. His shoes were polished, his posture alert. That night, as shadows gathered over Fairwind and the storm lamps were lit in the dining room, Miss Marple returned quietly to the front desk. The receptionist, a young woman with anxious eyes, handed over the guest register without question. Miss Marple took it to the corner of the drawing room, leafing through names slowly. Then she found it. Dennis Wilder, room 11. She tapped the name once with her pencil, then closed the book. Later that evening, she spotted Jasper and Callum playing cards near the fireplace. Their youthful faces looked strained, older than they had days before. She approached gently. "Forgive the interruption, boys," she said. "But do either of you happen to know a man named Dennis?" They exchanged a glance. Both shook their heads at first, then Jasper paused. "Dennis, wait, yes, that sounds familiar. That must be Joyce's ex-boyfriend." Miss Marple's voice remained soft. "Joyce," Callum chimed in, "Elena's older sister. She used to work in Mr. Harrow's office. A few months ago there was an office party. She fell from the terrace, died instantly. They said it was an accident." A long silence fell over them. Miss Marple's thoughts swirled behind her calm expression. A young woman dies at a party. A man connected to her shows up unannounced. Another girl, possibly close to the truth, ends up mutilated. She gave them both a kind smile and thanked them. Later, she stood by the window in the corridor, looking out at the jungle now cloaked in layers of mist and memory. The sky had darkened to ink. Somewhere out there, among the moss and damp, truth still lingered. From her coat pocket she withdrew her diary once more and wrote with careful precision. Joyce's death was the beginning, but Beatrix's murder may not be the end. She stared out into the blackness and closed the book. Something old had been reawakened in Fairwind, and Miss Marple had no intention of letting it return to sleep. Chapter 5. Whispers behind the paneled walls. The sea air that morning was thick and wet, clinging to every surface and scenting the air with salt and stone. But for Miss Marple, the weather was irrelevant. Her thoughts were clear, sharper, in fact, than they had been since her arrival at the Fairwind Hotel. Like a knot finally loosened, clarity had begun to take hold. She sat at her writing desk, the matchbox turned slowly between her fingers. The Harrow Club, private members only. It was no longer just a fragment of mystery. The name struck a chord deep in her memory. The Harrow Club wasn't merely a place, it was a fortress of secrecy, one of those old London establishments where influence traveled in whispers, and truth was often quietly buried under oak-paneled traditions. And there was more. Beatrix's father, Mr. Harrow, wasn't just a guest there. He was affiliated through the company that had long supported its events, hosted its members, and employed its silence. This was not a coincidence. This was a door. By mid-morning, Miss Marple and Inspector Sims were en route to London, the coastal roads giving way to city smoke and rhythm. Miss Marple, gloved and composed, stared quietly out of the window. Sims drove with a new stiffness in his jaw. Neither spoke until the car rolled up outside the Harrow Club, a tall, unassuming building set back from the street in Mayfair. The facade was elegant in its restraint, its entrance guarded not by uniformed men, but by silence. The doorman gave them a once-over as they entered. Inside, everything was as Miss Marple remembered from her younger days, spent on errands and teas with a friend's father. Rich mahogany paneling, thick burgundy carpets, and the lingering scent of tobacco. It was a place where time moved slower, and men spoke in lowered tones, cloaked in a permanence that resisted intrusion. The receptionist, dressed in a dark waistcoat with a discreet crest, approached. Miss Marple gave him a benign smile. "I wonder if I might trouble you, young man. I'm looking for someone who may have visited some time ago, a Mr. Dennis Wilder." The man stiffened. His glance flicked to the leather-bound visitor's register on the counter before he answered. "That name? Yes. I believe he visited once. It was some time ago." "And was he alone?" asked Inspector Sims, stepping forward with his badge barely visible. The receptionist hesitated. Then, in a lower voice, "No, sir. He was accompanied by a young woman, Joyce Dorn, if I recall correctly." The name passed between them like a gust through a long-closed corridor. Miss Marple's eyes lit, but her voice remained soft. "Thank you. You've been very helpful, E." They walked slowly toward the rear lounge. It was quiet inside, save for the occasional clink of a glass or the rustle of a newspaper. Miss Marple sat near a window that overlooked the stone courtyard and accepted a cup of tea brought by a young waiter. Sims stood near the fireplace, absorbing everything: paintings, club crests, the absence of women. A few minutes later, another waiter approached. This one bore a silver tray with a tall glass of juice and a folded bill. He placed it before Miss Marple without a word. She looked up, slightly confused. "I didn't order this." But the waiter had already turned away. With practiced calm, Miss Marple unfolded the bill. Nestled inside was a folded note, written in a hurried but deliberate hand. Joyce didn't fall from the terrace. She was pushed. There was no signature, no clue as to who had sent it. But the message pulsed with urgency and fear. She passed it to Sims beneath the table, whispering only, "Don't react." He read it quickly, his face unreadable. A few moments later, he leaned closer and said under his breath, "We're going back." Now. The ride back to the coast was long and silent. London faded behind them in a blur of brick and smoke, the countryside returning with its brooding hedgerows and winding lanes. But the silence in the car was not from fatigue, it was from calculation. Each of them was turning over possibilities, re-examining facts now shaded by a new implication. Joyce Dawn had not died by accident. She had been murdered. And someone in the Harrow Club, perhaps even Mr. Harrow himself, was protecting that truth. They returned to the Fairwind Hotel as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden hue across the cliffs. Inside, the hotel had settled into its evening hush. Guests moved slowly, staff spoke in lowered tones. The air held a tension, like the final breath before a confession. Miss Marple entered the dining hall and took her usual seat. She greeted the other guests politely, accepted a cup of tea, and complimented the lemon sole without once revealing the fire kindling behind her composed demeanor. She noticed Mr. Harrow at the far end of the room, seated with a glass of wine, his expression impassive. His daughter's remains had barely been buried, and yet there he sat, speaking with quiet intensity to a man Miss Marple didn't recognize. She took note of the man's cufflinks, lion crests. After dinner, she returned to her room. She didn't undress immediately, nor did she sit. Instead, she moved to the window and stared out at the sea, its waves crashing rhythmically against the rocks below. She opened her green leather diary and wrote in a fine hand. Dennis Wilder visited the Harrow Club with Joyce Dawn. Joyce and Beatrix, both dead. Eleanor, silent. Note delivered anonymously. Joyce was pushed. Mr. Harrow's connection too consistent to ignore. She paused. Is Elena withholding the truth, or protecting someone from it? She closed the diary and sat on the edge of her bed, still fully dressed, her mind spinning with timelines, connections, and unasked questions. It wasn't just murder they were facing, it was a network of power, silence, and shame. Something festering between a London club and a jungle cliff. Something passed between fathers and daughters, between secrets buried and secrets that refused to stay hidden. Outside, a faint fog had begun to creep across the lawn, and inside room 64, Miss Marple didn't sleep. She waited, because the next piece of truth she felt was already on its way. Chapter 6. The Whisper Beneath the Statue. The afternoon hung heavy over Fairwind, the ocean air motionless as though holding its breath. Waves curled against the cliffside far below, their rhythm a murmur beneath the weight of gathering truths. Inside the hotel, time felt slowed. Voices dropped to whispers, movements measured. Somewhere within its walls, secrets turned in the dark like a key in a lock. Miss Marple moved quietly through the hallway, her footsteps soft upon the aged carpet. She had spoken little at luncheon, choosing instead to watch, to note, to consider. But now, with the sun casting long fingers through the upper corridor windows, she made her way to Elena's room. Outside the door stood a young doctor, arms crossed, his face etched with professional caution. "She's still fragile," he warned gently, "emotionally unstable. Best not to press her. Miss Marple merely gave him a mild, pleasant smile, the kind that yielded nothing yet unsettled no one. "I'll just sit with her," she replied. "Nothing more." The doctor paused, but there was something about her, perhaps her age, or the serenity in her tone, that made him nod and step aside. Inside, the room was dim and still. The curtains were drawn tight, the air stale with untouched time. Eleanor sat in a cushioned chair near the window, her arms wrapped around her knees. Her eyes did not turn at the sound of the door. Miss Marple entered quietly and placed a porcelain cup of herbal tea on the side table. "I didn't know your sister Joyce," she said after a moment. "But I've known people like her, people with courage enough to speak the truth, even when the world asks them to stay silent." At first, Elena didn't move. She remained motionless, her face pale and blank. But slowly, something in her posture shifted. Her shoulders sank, her eyes, wide and red-rimmed, filled quietly with tears. "I don't know what to do anymore," she whispered. "You've already done something," Miss Marple said gently. "You've survived. That matters." Eleanor's voice cracked as she began to speak again, each word dragging up something deeper. Joyce saw things, files Mr. Harrow kept locked up in the office. There were bank statements, names, shipping records. It looked wrong, so wrong. She said it was all illegal. She told Dennis Wilder she was going to confront him. Miss Marple's eyes remained fixed on the young woman's face. Her hands were still in her lap, but every inch of her was listening. "That night," Elena continued, "at the office party, I was there too. Not in the main room. I was upstairs. I heard shouting, then silence. And then someone screamed. Her eyes stared ahead, unfocused. I looked down, and Joyce was on the ground." Miss Marple said nothing. She simply waited. And after a moment, Elena gave her more. "Before she died, she told me she'd hidden something. Evidence. She said, 'There's an old statue in the jungle near the mango tree. She buried it underneath.' Miss Marple's hand, resting on her diary, stilled completely. "Did anyone else know this?" she asked. Eleanor shook her head. "Just me. But later, when Beatrix found out the truth about her father, she said she wanted to help. So I told her too. I trusted her. Joyce had warned me, if I disappear, go to the statue." A silence settled over the room, deep and filled with things unsaid. Miss Marple placed her hand gently on Elena's. "That was very brave of you," she said. "You trusted the right people, even if it cost you." Elena's fingers trembled, but she nodded faintly. That evening, Miss Marple sat opposite Inspector Sims in a quiet corner of the hotel lounge. The low amber light cast shadows along the wood-paneled walls as she recounted every detail of her conversation with Elena. When she finished, Sims leaned back, his brows drawn together. "So," he said grimly, "the jungle isn't just wilderness. It's a graveyard for secrets." Miss Marple gave a quiet nod. "And those who fear the truth don't simply hide it, they obliterate it." Sims stared into the hearth for a long moment, then said, "We'll need to go back. Dig beneath that statue." Just then, Miss Marple's gaze shifted toward the lobby. Dennis Wilder had just walked through the front doors. He wore no coat this time, just a plain shirt, sleeves rolled. His hair was damp from the sea air, and his step was slower, heavier. Miss Marple studied him as if seeing him for the first time, not just his face, but the subtleties, the way he avoided eye contact, how his left hand rubbed absently at his wrist, the faint limp in his right leg. These were not details of vanity or accident. They were the footprints of fear. She watched him walk down the hallway, watched the tension in his shoulders, the curve of his neck, and then, without meaning to, she smiled. Something had finally made sense. She returned to her room, her diary open on the desk, beside a half-finished row of knitting. But she didn't reach for either. Instead, she moved to the window and stood for a long time in silence. Beyond the hotel lawn, the jungle rose like a shadow, dry, tangled, and unknowable. But Miss Marple now knew exactly where to go and what she expected to find. Not just a box of papers, but something far older, a chain of silence that had snapped, a path from Joyce's courage to Beatrix's murder, from Elena's trembling silence to Danis's evasive step. She opened her diary slowly and wrote, "Joyce knew, Beatrix believed, Elena witnessed. All paths lead to the statue, all truths buried beneath it." She closed the book, pressed her hand gently to its cover, and walked to the edge of the balcony as the wind began to rise. Far below, the jungle rustled faintly, and somewhere within it something stirred, not leaves, not branches, but truth waking. Ready. Chapter 7. Truth Unearthed. The jungle wore a stillness that morning, a silence deeper than the usual hush of rustling leaves and distant bird calls. Beneath the mango tree the air felt thick as though it remembered too much. Miss Marple, Inspector Sims, and a constable moved with care and solemn purpose through the dew-laced undergrowth, their steps light, but the weight of what they were about to uncover grounding each movement. They reached the old statue. It stood, stooped and weathered, a rough-hewn stone figure half covered in moss, its base sunken into the soft earth. Time had bent it forward slightly, as if it too was leaning in to hear a long-kept secret about to be spoken aloud. Miss Marple stepped back, letting the constable take the lead. He knelt and began clearing the earth with measured hands. The silence was broken only by the scrape of his trowel and the occasional call of a bird overhead. And then it appeared. A small, rusted tin box, its lid smeared with time and soil, sat nestled where the base of the statue met the ground. The constable handed it carefully to Miss Marple, who opened it with delicate precision. Inside lay several folded documents and a smaller, time-yellowed piece of paper, something like a torn page from a diary. Inspector Sims leaned in as she unfolded the letter. Her eyes scanned it first. Her breath held. The documents were damning. Signed import-export slips bearing Mr. Harrow's name, a medical form listing organs by blood group and patient ID, with no hospital headers, only serial codes, cold, clinical, illegal. Inspector Sims took the file in his hands, his face tightening. "This is direct evidence," he said grimly. "Drug and human organ smuggling." Miss Marple said nothing. She was holding the letter now, reading the handwritten words with quiet care. It was Joyce's handwriting, no doubt. "If this letter is found by anyone, understand that I am no longer alive. Mr. Harrow knows I've discovered everything. And I'm a threat to him. He has already threatened me. Perhaps today or tomorrow he will have me killed." Inspector Sims exhaled slowly. Such a bold confession. And Mr. Harrow still wears the mask of innocence. Miss Marple folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the tin. "The time has come," she said softly. "We must gather everyone." Back at the Fairwind Hotel, a dark tension stirred the air. Staff moved with glances rather than words. The waves crashing below the cliffs seemed to echo the urgency Miss Marple carried in her stride. She found Freddie in the lounge and leaned toward him. "Please gather everyone in the drawing room. It's time." Within 15 minutes, the room filled, first with murmurs, then with silence. Mr. Harrow entered stiffly, his lips pressed into a line, his hands clasped behind his back. Elena sat in the corner, her face pale but attentive. Danis Wilder hovered by the wall, not speaking, not making eye contact. Freddie stood near the fireplace, visibly tense. 2 senior hotel staff members lingered in the background, as did Inspector Sims, arms folded. Miss Marple stood before the low table and opened the tin. She placed the documents and the folded letter on its surface. "What you see before you," she began, her voice firm yet gentle, "was found beneath the jungle statue, hidden in the earth by someone who knew they might not live to speak freely." She held up the shipment slips. "These are records of illegal drug and organ smuggling. Each one bears Mr. Harrow's signature. And this," she lifted the letter, "was written by Joyce Dorn. Her final testimony." She read aloud, "Mr. Harrow, knows I've discovered everything, and I'm a threat to him. He has already threatened me. Perhaps today or tomorrow, he will have me killed." The room fell still. The only sound was the faint creak of the wooden floor under shifting feet. Mr. Harrow exploded. "That's a lie. I didn't kill anyone. This is a setup." Miss Marple turned to him unflinching. "If it were a lie, Mr. Harrow, it wouldn't have been buried in the earth, hidden beneath stone and silence." She turned then to Dennis Wilder. Her tone shifted, quieter, more cutting. "But Beatrix was not murdered by Mr. Harrow. She was killed by you, Mr. Wilder." Dennis froze. "You went into the jungle that day," she continued, "and you returned without her. A golden button from your coat was found near her body. Its lion crest matches the design of your current jacket, custom made for Harrow Club members. We also found a cigar stub, and your darkened lips tell me you're a habitual cigar smoker." Dennis said nothing. Inspector Sims moved forward, gently pressing at the buttons of Dennis's coat. One was missing. Miss Marple's voice softened, but it only made her words more damning. "Why did you kill her, Mr. Wilder? Was it to protect Mr. Harrow's secrets, or were you trying to hide something of your own?" Dennis finally spoke. His voice was low, rasped. "That's not the whole truth." He stopped. His jaw worked silently and he looked down, as if the floor might offer some comfort. "What is the whole truth, then?" asked Sims, stepping closer. Dennis looked up. His face was pale now, the mask of smugness replaced by something raw. Guilt, perhaps, or fear. "I didn't go there to kill her," he said. "She asked to meet. Said she knew about Joyce. Said she was going to the police." "And," said Miss Marple quietly. Dennis swallowed. I tried to stop her from talking. We argued. I grabbed her arm. She stumbled, fell against a rock. There was blood. Too much blood." He took a shaky breath. "She didn't move. I panicked. I thought if they found her, they'd trace it back to me, and to Harrow, so I scattered the body, hid the evidence. I thought no one would ever find it." Elena let out a strangled sound. Mr. Harrow collapsed into a chair, face ashen. Inspector Sims moved quickly, placing Dennis under arrest. "You'll be formally charged," he said, "with the murder of Beatrix Harrow and the obstruction of justice in the case of Joyce Dorn." Dennis said nothing as he was led away. Miss Marple turned to Mr. Harrow. "You didn't kill your daughter, Mr. Harrow, but you created the shadow in which her killer thrived. Your crimes were the foundation of all this. Your lies bred silence, and silence, in time, kills." Mr. Harrow looked down at his hands, trembling now. Miss Marple picked up the tin box. "This jungle," she said quietly, "wasn't just roots and vines. It held buried truths, left behind by a girl no one listened to. Until now." She turned, nodded to Freddie, and walked out of the room with Sims beside her. Behind them the drawing room sat frozen, part courtroom, part confession box. The wind stirred the curtains gently, as if exhaling the last breath of a long-held lie. And from the jungle beyond, a silence settled again, not of secrets but of justice finally, painfully, unearthed. Chapter 8. The Shape of the Truth. The drawing room was cloaked in a silence so complete it seemed to vibrate. The heavy velvet drapes muffled even the sea wind outside, and every breath inside the Fairwind Hotel's parlor felt measured, tentative. No one moved. No one dared interrupt what was unfolding. Dennis Wilder stood beneath the arched window, the morning light outlining the shadows on his face. His expression was unreadable, somewhere between defeat and defiance. Inspector Sims, ever composed, turned toward him with the steadiness of a man who had waited long enough. "Why did you kill Beatrix?" he asked, his voice steady but edged with iron. Dennis hesitated. The muscles in his jaw tightened. For a moment it seemed he might refuse to answer, but then, as if letting go of a weight he'd carried too long, he spoke. "I didn't mean to kill her," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "But I made Joyce a promise that I'd protect Elena, no matter what." He looked around the room briefly, at Elena, who sat pale and hollow-eyed, and then at Miss Marple, who met his gaze with quiet, unwavering calm. When I found out that Beatrix wasn't trying to help Helena but was using her to get to the statue and whatever Joyce had hidden there, I followed them. His tone changed slightly, still cold, but quieter now, almost distant. In the jungle I confronted them. I knocked Helena out first. I didn't want her interfering or running away. Then Beatrix and I argued. She was furious, accused me of betrayal. She pushed me, and I hit back, harder than I meant to. A pause. She fell, struck a rock, didn't get up. The room was still. Inspector Sims's next words came slowly. And Joyce? Dennis's eyes fled, this time with something darker. Rage, resentment, grief. Joyce didn't fall. He spat. She was pushed. Harrow and Beatrix, they killed her. Maybe not directly, but they threatened her, isolated her, and then finished the job when she got too close to the truth. He looked down now, his voice softer, the anger drained from it. I just wanted to show the world what they really were. He met Sims's eyes. And I did. I don't regret it. The silence after his words felt final, like the last line of a confession etched in stone. Inspector Sims exhaled sharply through his nose and gave a curt nod. Dennis Wilder, you are under arrest for the murder of Beatrix Harrow and obstruction of justice. He turned to Mr. Harrow, who had said nothing for the past hour, seated stiffly like a forgotten statue. Mr. Harrow, based on the evidence recovered from the jungle and Joyce Dorn's written testimony, you are also under arrest on suspicion of criminal conspiracy, threats, and involvement in illegal organ trafficking. You'll be taken into custody immediately. 2 uniformed officers, summoned earlier, stepped into the room and moved swiftly. As the 2 men were led out, the atmosphere in the drawing room changed, not immediately, not with cheer or relief, but like the air itself had lifted, the pressure diffusing from the space it had occupied for so long. It was Freddie who spoke first. Miss Marple, he said, his voice hoarse, I don't know what to say. She gave him a warm, worn smile. Then don't say anything, it's quite all right. But later that evening, during a special dinner hosted quietly in the hotel's dining room, Freddie did find the words. The guests, though few, all raised their glasses to the silver-haired woman whose quiet wisdom had unraveled the twisted tapestry of deceit and death. To Miss Marple, Freddie said, raising his glass, for seeing what others miss, and for reminding us that truth, however long buried, always finds its way back to light. The room lifted with soft applause, and Miss Marple, flushed but gracious, inclined her head. She didn't need grand speeches, she never had. The next morning, the coastal air was crisp and the sky was clear, a rare gift after weeks of fog and storm. At the train station, the platform was quiet. Freddie stood with Miss Marple as the train approached, the gentle hum of the engine growing louder. You saved us, he said, not for the first time. Miss Marple shook her head gently. I did nothing heroic. I merely recognized the shape of the truth. Sometimes it's all one can do. Freddie gave her a small smile, and with a final nod, Miss Marple boarded the train. As it pulled away from the station, the breeze caught the edge of her scarf and lifted it slightly, like a wave. Goodbye. St. Mary Mead greeted her with familiar silence and the soft rustle of autumn leaves. The village green was just as she had left it. The postbox, the chapel bell, even the lavender bushes outside her garden gate, unchanged, unmoved. Inside her cottage, she boiled water for tea, selected her favorite china cup, and opened her knitting basket. She paused for a moment before she picked up her needles. There was peace in her home again, but she knew something had changed within her. Another pattern, another story, had been added to the fabric of her life. She would not speak of it unless asked, and even then, only in hints and fragments. Because some truths once known need no retelling. And so she began to knit again, her fingers steady, her mind clear. Outside the sky brightened, the birds sang as they always did. And inside, in the still warmth of her parlor, Miss Marple continued her work. Quiet, persistent, and certain that whatever evil tried to hide itself next, she would, as ever, be waiting.